a palestra, Marquinho.
You're live. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the TSS Weekly Public Lectures. We're very happy to be back after the Christmas and year-end breaks. Today, then, is our first lecture of the year. It's going to be talking about the Spiritist view of what is God. And we have our brother and colleague, Marco Magalhães, who will be giving this lecture today. As we begin to start, I will ask Rafael Oliveira to do an initial reading and start us off with a beautiful prayer.
Thank you, Joe. So I'll be reading a message from Happy Life from Divaldo Franco by the Spirits of Consciousness. I'm going to open at random. Make it a habit to tell the truth. The white lie habit is a gateway to more serious ones, pushing you toward the quagmire of libel and slander. A single spark produces the same blaze as a crackling flame. Major crimes begin as misdemeanors overlooked by justice, which make for a more severe offense. Be morally demanding of yourself. Don't climb into the boat of general conventions. Every person must answer for him or herself, and each deed leaves a mark on the conscience. Don't stop being yourself as you morally progress. Dear Lord, dear Jesus, our Master, our friend and our guide, we ask you to bless us, to shine your light on us and involve us with your love, so that we can all be inspired, especially Marco, so that we can develop this lecture today in the way that we can learn a little bit more and strengthen our faith, console our hearts, and be ready for the week ahead. Thank you. I'm so good.
Thank you very much, Rafael. Now it's over to you, Marco. Good inspiration, and we'll come back at the end to have a short roundtable with questions from our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Rafael, and everyone that's connected with us today. It's such a good time and great to be here, connected again one more time with all of you. And I hope you guys are doing well and keeping safe and keeping healthy in this time of challenges that we're facing right now. Also, a lot of time and opportunity for us to learn and to rethink a lot of things in our life. And what a great opportunity to start talking about God, right? And I'm quite sure that a number of us had the situation where we had to think about God, not only like our routine thinking about God, but more like evoking God in different ways and scenarios because of challenges that we're living. And I'm quite sure that some of us have tried to reach out and to prayers, to thoughts, and many of us have actually questioned, right, what God is, right, because of the scenarios that we're living through, right, and questioning why we go through this, right? Why do we have to see suffering around us, and all those things that we question quite often. And so I think this is a great opportunity just to basically talk about what God is and give the Spiritist perspective on things, right? So I'm going to be talking a lot about the Spirit's book by Allan Kardec, which you can have access online through Amazon and through the Toronto Spirit Society Library. There are many places you can find the references for it, right? So I want to briefly go back into past a little bit, and I want you guys to travel with me in time. So I want you guys to picture yourselves many thousands of years ago in scenarios where we'd still have to pretty much work for our food on a daily basis, but not not like in a job, but actually going after the food, right? And we had to survive on crops, and we had to migrate to places because of floods and weather and temperature. We had to hunt for animals, scenarios where, we're still very, very early stages of developing our society. And in those moments, you can picture yourself now in a situation where things are challenging. And then you're looking around you and you start to see things that are not controlled by yourself, right? For example, weather, the day and the night, right? The forests, things that are absolutely 100% beyond your control. If you're in that scenario, you could probably imagine that a lot of people, us actually incarnated at that time, would look into those things and say, well, wait a minute, if there are things that are completely beyond my reach and my control, there has to be something above, right, that regulates and coordinates and controls those things, right? And that is one of the very early concepts of the existence of God. But interestingly enough, all of us have this little seed, this little concept or idea that there's some sort of superior entity or moral concept or something above us, right? And that is innate of us. So it's a combination between what's inside of us to what we used to see before that kind of translates into this early concept of God. So obviously not surprising, the very first ideas of God were, for example, related to planets and to the moon or to the sun, right? So the sun being some sort of a superior entity. Cannot reach it, cannot control it. I don't know what it is. So that is some sort of God, right? Or deity, right? And same idea with the concepts of the moon, and then the wind, and then something regulating forests, and then all of a sudden we started to kind of narrow it down to a more human-like characteristic, right? In a way that we could relate better to, or we could see ourselves into that creation. So we humanized God and created so many different drawings and pictures and concepts of God being a human figure. And throughout the years, some theories have evolved into giving a gender or to God, which were never present in the early stages of the development. And then we started to see God as a male, which is something that, again, never really existed back in the past. We also exposed to much more well-developed concepts of God when we're looking at early Judaism, right? We're looking at the very early monotheistic religions that now believe that God is one and is a creator, right? And is certainly above us, and we have to understand and to respect and to go by the rules that God created. That's a lot more evolved, right, in the concepts of God. And now to the point that we are today, where most of us would somehow believe in some sort of superior being with different concepts, obviously, and different names. But this is something that's still very well present in most of our society, right? Obviously, some individuals would not believe it or would challenge it or question it. That's a little bit different. So that's atheism and agnosticism. But in the vast majority of cases, there is some sort of belief there's something above us, right? And this something above us, right? Not obviously figuratively way of speaking, is what we're going to study today. Okay, so that are interesting. There are many religions that understand philosophically that God cannot be really comprehended or explained in words, and that is something quite interesting too. And not only us in Spiritism find ways to explain God through concepts, but not describing as a figure or entity. For example, Muslims are the same, right? So they don't draw or perceive God as in any shape and form. So that because they also believe that Muslims also believe that God is beyond comprehension, right, and does not resemble is not part or resembled its creation, right? Just as separate things, right? And that's something that we, for example, in Spiritism believe too, right? So one of the ways that I like to introduce concepts of God is actually based on the book by the Spirit May May, by Chico Xavier. And in this book, there's this very, very interesting story that someone is walking and asks a Bedouin, right, which is, considered to be an ignorant person, right? So like a worker, heavy or like hard worker, not really intellectually developed as others in the society at the time. So he was praying incessantly to God, like all the time, constantly praying to God. And this very well-known and intelligent individual, according to his concepts of intelligence, asked him, so why are you praying all the time, right, to God, right? And then the Bedouin explains that, so when you're looking at a jewel, right, that you see, like a very beautiful jewel, how do you recognize the origin of that jewel? And then obviously, the individual answers, well, you look at the details and the marks left by the jeweler's trademark, right? Also, how do you recognize a letter, right? By, from the handwriting to the envelope to the signature, right? So you see the details of the creator in every single one of those, right? And then he continues, right? Can't you affirm that a camel and not a dog passed by the highway? He asks, right? Can you see the difference between a camel and a dog? And then he say, well, you look at the marks, right? The marks that the animal leaves behind on the trail, and you can see, right, what type of animal it is, right? And then the Bedouin continues, well, now let me explain to you. So look up, look at the stars, look at the sky. They're not the work of human beings or animals or anything that you know in this planet, right? So therefore, they can only be the work of something that is a creator, which also created us, and that is God, therefore, right? And then basically the conversation stops there. So now this is a very interesting way to start this, because this is exactly how many philosophers also explain the idea of God, right? For example, even Isaac Newton, for example, believed in that same idea. If he also wrote in many of his manuscripts that by looking at the particular type of movements of stars and planets and how some of them follow patterns and some not, he believed, and he was a firm believer, that there had to be a creator or a God that would coordinate or that particular type of movement, right? That would coordinate that. So he was also a firm believer of that concept, right? So in Spiritism now, we're going to go more specific to Spiritism. The very first question in the Spirit's book, question 1, right? So the question is, what is God, right? Not who, right? Because we understand it's not a human concept, like it's not a human figure, because it cannot be part of its own creation, right? You will recognize God in what he creates, but he's not it, right? He's not the creation itself. So the spirits are going to answer, God is supreme intelligence, first cause of all things. That's a great answer, because see, there's a lot there. So it's the first cause, so it's the creator. The very first moment of creation, he was there, right? And he's the supreme intelligence. So if you put in a scale of things, there's a maximum of that scale, there's a minimum, just kind of average, right? So if there's a scale of things that we see on a daily basis, so the spirits are telling us, think about a scale and understand that at the very top of that scale, there's going to be this sort of supreme intelligence, and that is God, right? He explains that. And then question number 4, Allan Kardec is going to ask the spirits again, so what proof do we have of the existence of God? And then the spirits are going to answer in another very interesting way. So the axiom in which you apply to all scientific research, right? There's no effect without a cause. So in that sense, search out the cause of whatever is not a work of man, and the reason will furnish the answer to your question. So he's basically leading us back to that same story by Mei Mei, or Mei Mei's related to this story, which comes much after, right? Which is basically telling us, well, think about a concept where everything has an initial cause and movement or an action that causes a result, right? So that initial action, right? That is that's the cause of all things, right? So that will be what we understand as God, right? But very clearly here, you can tell by the answers that we can't really understand what God is completely, right? So we have to create concepts, right? We have to create ideas of how to explain it, right? And then we're going to talk about them very soon, because Spiritism is not the first to come up with this. Like, there's a long history of other philosophers and spirits that incarnated and taught us about this process. And now in Spiritism, we're kind of uniting them under a more a Christian concept, right? And uniting research, philosophy, and religion, right? But I think that's what we're doing. But some of these concepts have been around for a long time, right? So what the spirits are saying then is that God is the first cause of all things. He's the supreme intelligence. He's the driver of everything we know and our existence. But we are kind of working with it, right? Because we're living in it, and we can change things, right? We have this ability to co-create, right, with God. So that's a very interesting concept that Spiritism brings to us, right? Every time we're making changes to things around us, we are co-creating, right? We're developing the changes to the universe that can help other people, right? So that's how important we are, right? So now, remember I mentioned that we have to create certain concepts, right, that will explain to us what God is, right? So in Spiritism, we believe in 5 major principles, right, that to explain what God is, right? So the first one is God is eternal, and I'll explain that, right? So eternal means that there's no real beginning and there's no end, right? Because if God had a beginning, then something would have created God, right? And if God is the creator and is the only one, then that concept becomes a little bit problematic, right? So and if he was created by something else, so this something else would also have a much larger will be a somewhat kind of above the powers, let's put it this way, of God, and that would not be making much sense, right? So God is eternal in a sense that he was not created, and he's atemporal, so he does no really timelines, and there's nothing before. There's no beginning after him, before him, right? So the next point is God is immutable, right? And this is an easy one to comprehend. You can imagine, even nowadays, right? We're going through moments where rules are changing quite frequently, right? So we have one rule, and then the next day things change again, and that changes again, right? And then different agencies and governments and people making different rules that sometimes conflict, sometimes make it harder for us to abide to, right? So you can imagine in a universe where you have conflicting or changing rules, that would be quite challenging for the universe to survive, right? So if God is one and it's at the end, at the top of that scale of creation and created everything, so the God cannot change, right? Because if God is perfect, so there's no changes, right? So basically, God created all the laws of the universe, right? And without that immutability, there wouldn't be stability, right, in the creation, right? So God is immutable because it's perfect, right? So the next one is God is immaterial, right? So God is eternal, right? God is immutable, and now immaterial, right? And this is something that we struggle with, right? Because many of us will try to define God by some material things, right? I'll give an example. So some people say, oh, God is light. Well, light is actually a material thing, it's part of the creation. So God cannot be light, right? So light is more like a figurative concept that we use to say that something is beautiful, it's bright, it's full of energy, right? And in that sense, yes, that's correct. It's like a descriptive term, right? But it can't be light because light is, as we know, energy, right? Matter, right? So it can't, it's just part of a creation. Like a painter is not, like an artist, right? Is not the canvas, right? You can see the artist through the canvas, but he's not the canvas, right? So that's kind of the same idea. So basically, God nature is different from everything we know in the universe, right? And we can't define what it is. So in that sense, we're very similar to many other religions that believe in such a way. Um, and and obviously, God being one, right, and being different from any matter that we can possibly think about, because we're living in the creation, right? So it's very hard to define exactly what it is, right? So that's why we say it's just immaterial, right? So next one is God is all powerful. Basically, there's nothing more powerful than God. Now, the definition of power here is not the same one we use in politics and other politics. So powerful means is basically this concept that everything is created or is initiated, right, by God, so that God retains the maximum possible power that we can imagine in that way, right? If it was not the case, then it would have counteracting energies or forces, right? So God versus something else, which would obviously bring a lot of instability, right? It would mean so God might not have created. So basically, it would mean that God would not have created everything. There was another force that would create other things, and those were conflicting forces. There wouldn't be stability, right? So it'll be something more powerful or powerful as God, which wouldn't bring stability to the system, right? Um, so the next one is God is supremely just and good. And I think this is the one we understand, I think, a lot better, but that's the one we're probably challenging the most when we're going through hard times, right? Because I can hear this question so many times, like, so if God is perfect, it's all just and good. So why I'm going through this, right? And that is the important distinction here between God and us, in a way that we are responsible for our actions, right? God is the creator, how powerful and good. God is perfect. And he allows us to come to this universe with this open page in front of us that we can drive our own stories. We can make the decisions, but every decision that we make will open up a particular type of consequence, which is the next page in our book. And sometimes the collectivity of all those decisions that we make will keeping up, opening up pages in our story that are very challenging, because that's our learning pages, right? And because the laws are perfect, then for every action, there's a reaction. For everything we do, there's a consequence. And sometimes the consequences can be seen very challenging for us, but they're also the way for us to fix things. So God is perfect. It's just that sometimes we cannot see that part because we're actually living through the consequence of our decisions. May not now, may have been in the past. It doesn't matter when it happened, but nothing happens by chance. Everything that's happening now has a cause, and the cause relates to ourselves only, right? So, in a way, that is the law. And every time we deviate from the law, we'll suffer consequences, but not because someone else is imposing them on us. We are imposing them on us, right? So, yes, God is supremely just and good. And every single time that happens to us, everything that we have to do to compensate is alleviated, it's helped. There's everyone around us trying to support us. So, we're never alone. We're never alone. We're never suffering unnecessarily. We're always supported. So there's a network in the universe that support us, and we have to think that way. The more we think differently, the more we try to think that we're alone, we're isolated, we're this and that, we're suffering, then we close ourselves to help, right? And that is a problem. So, and so much so that Andrea Luis brings an interesting concept that the diseases are sometimes when the moments where we shut the doors, right, to these blessings that come from God. When we close it, then we're more susceptible to have particular types of diseases, right? So just think about that. So the providential so according to Allan Kardec, the providential wisdom in the divine laws is revealed in the smallest things as well as in the largest, right? And this wisdom makes it impossible for us to doubt whether God is justice and goodness. So that is the perfection there, right? So those are the 5 concepts, right, brought to us by Allan Kardec. Now, let's go one more question now in the Spirit's book, into question 19, right? So Allan Kardec's going to ask the Spirit, can't humans grasp some of nature's secrets through scientific investigation? And then it's going to say, the Spirits are going to say, science has been given to them or to us for their advancement in all matters. So science, yes, science is an amazing tool we have. Think about this. We're actually living through this, right? We're living through a situation where science allowed us to develop a vaccine that can actually fight a pandemic and is saving millions of lives every day, right? Whether we believe it or we don't believe it, whether we have feelings against it or not, the fact is it does help and is saving lives. And this is actually not only we created it, it's actually God allowed us to develop this, right? So this is part of the divine laws. So we can create ways, co-creators, right? We can create ways to alleviate our own consequences, right? So this is perfect, right? So God is, this is one of the another examples why God is perfect, right? But obviously, there are certain things, and then the spirits continue here. The more humans are allowed to grasp such mysteries or things that are difficult to understand, right? The more they should admire the power and wisdom of the Creator. However, whether through pride or through weakness, look carefully. Their own minds often render them victims of illusion, and they pile theory upon theory. Every day they see how many errors they have mistakens they take for truth, and how many truths they have dismissed as errors. So that's us, right? These realizations are further blows to their pride, right? It's tough. So it's talking about pride collectively here as humanity, that we have a hard time understanding that we're actually not even close to being really like a superior intelligent being, right? We're actually learning every day. We're like going to kindergarten right now, right? Trying to grasp concepts that the spirits are coming and telling us, and they're saying, guys, you don't have words to understand this. You can't grasp the concept yet. You're doing a great job, right? But you're still far, far away from understanding all of this. And you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make big mistakes, right? And some spirits are going to come and tell you the real truth, and basically you're going to shut them off and you're going to kill them, right? How many scientists have been actually killed, right? Because they brought new concepts, right? About, for example, the sun and how Earth spins around the sun, like things that are just basic to us now. But a lot of spirits have suffered, and pride is a big thing, right? Considering the concepts of the universe. Now, try to imagine, like if you're 6,000 years ago, when the development of civilization as we understand now, and then you went to one of, like we today, like we ourselves now, went back in time that way and say, guys, listen to this. You know, you're going to have all this computer things. We're going to be talking over the internet through lectures, talking about the creation of the universe and God. you're going to be burned, right, in a fire, right? Because kind of that's who we are, right? We're learning, right? But that's a process that's going to take a long time. So let's keep moving. Now, if you think about another, so like, remember when I said that Spiritism is bringing all these concepts together, but some of these concepts are actually quite old, believe it or not, right? St. Thomas Aquinas, this is the 1200s, right? So this is a long time ago. It's not last week, right? He's obviously from Catholic Church, right? He have obviously one of the greatest philosophers of Catholic Church, and he describes he types about the five arguments, right? And these five arguments are incredibly well written and incredibly thoughtful, right? And unfortunately, they have been lost even inside own Catholic Church and other religions too that would actually take advantage of that and learn from that. So the first argument is the unmoved mover. Such a beauty. Look at this. So he's thinking about our senses, that whatever is in motion was put in motion by another thing. 1200s. That's what he's saying. Think about this. So advanced, right? So in the concept that everything that is kind of moving has to be put into motion by some type of other forces. So God has to be that initial force of everything, right? It's an incredible argument. So the argument of the first cause, right? The next one. So the second way is from, like, the second argument is that from the nature of deficient cause, right? So there's a word, there's a sense that everything, there's a sequence, there's an order, right? So therefore, it's important for us to think that if there's something happening now that is caused by something that happened before, if you go back into that timeline, there has to be a first cause of all the things that are happening today, right? It's just a basic concept, right? Very difficult to argue against, right? That's the argument of the first cause. Now, there's the other arguments called contingency, right? And St. Thomas is really amazing on this. So he describes this: that which does not exist only begins to exist by something already existing, right? Contingency. So if something existing now, it only exists by something that is already existing. And if you go back into that time scale, you find the original existence or the original cause of everything, right? So the argument of the degree, and I think I love this one, because basically, if you think that in everything there's a gradation scale, right? There are some people that have very good at some skills and other people are really bad at that skill. Some people are really, really good at this or really not good at that, right? There's a range in temperature. There's a range. Every concept that we can think about, there's some sort of a range. So if you think of the range of goodness and perfection, right? If there is, we look at us today and see there's different levels of morality and goodness in people. There has to be something down the bottom of that scale. There has to be something up on the top of that scale, and that perfection would be God, right? And those are the arguments from St. Thomas Aquinas. And then there's obviously the theological arguments too, right? That he brings up. So from that sense, so St. Thomas tells us, which is very similar to what we know from the Spirit's book, that God is simple and it's perfect and it's infinite. He said it's immutable. So it is very similar to what the concepts of the Spirits are bringing to us now from Allan Kardec, right? And then some of you are probably going to say, Marco, but you're a scientist and all you're talking about is philosophical and religious arguments, right? For the existence of God. So I absolutely love some of the works by one of the most cited chemists in the world, Henry Schaeffer III. For those of you who like to follow up science, his H index is actually 121, right in last year. So he's incredibly well published, well cited, phenomenal scientist. He's also a very religious individual who thinks about the concept of God too. So he also brings some arguments, right? Just like St. Thomas Aquinas had in the past. So these are mostly based on philosophy and scientific arguments. So he calls it cosmological argument, which would be, so the effect of the universe existence must have a suitable cause, which, like for everything that happens, there's a cause. We believe that. The theological argument that the design of the universe, the perfection of the laws that govern almost everything you can possibly imagine is governed by a law. And Einstein said something that was very interesting, that concept too. He said that the most incredible thing, or the most unexplainable thing about or incomprehensible thing about the universe, is that it is actually quite comprehensible. What he's trying to say, obviously, there's the fact that we actually can study and draw a law that governs the interactions of almost everything in the universe is phenomenal, because it points out to some sort of unity in the creation, right? Which we understand as God, right? The rational argument by Henry is that the operation of the universe according to order and natural law implies a mind or a creator behind it. That's the same idea, right? So that law that is immutable and is perfect and governs everything, that has to be created by a creator, or whichever way we call it or we explain it, right? And the ontological argument, which is another very interesting concept, and then René Descartes is actually one of the another fervent defense, supporter, and not only supporter, but he wrote at length about this, is the idea that the fact that we have some sort of a concept of God inside of us, like René Descartes talks about, it's like, I can actually picture a triangle, a shape, a square, right? I understand it. It's inside my thought. I can picture it, and I can see it in nature, right? So the concept of God is pretty much the same. So think about this. Like, I have some sort of innate concept of God, that humanity has it for its entire existence. It doesn't matter how way you frame it, the way you show it, or the way you unbelieve it, there's this little seed in there. The fact that I have it and I can picture it and I can kind of see it in the universe, that is in itself a concept of God. And the moral argument, which I think is the most important one, it's the same one that Spiritist brings to us, is that if you think the sense of right or wrong that we're having inside of us, which that scale of morality, of moral scale, that there's a perfect end to it. In other words, there's good and there's right or wrong in our consciousness. It means that awareness has to be brought to us by something that is obviously above us, right? So it implanted on us those seeds of conscience by another entity that we call God. Okay, so those are the most critical concepts of God that I think we need to really take carefully and understand and study, because it's Allan Kardec obviously says that faith without reason, right, is what is that, right? So unshakable faith is that the one that goes together with your reason and conscience and understanding, right? Having faith in God just because, I don't know, because I don't know why, but it's just someone told me to do or something like that. That faith it may not be as strong as it could, right? Because it's even a lot better, right? If you think about that and your faith and give a rationale, right? To give you an understanding behind it. Why are we doing this? Like, and what is God? Right? Why am I praying to God? Like the Bedouin was doing, and when he was asked by the super intelligent guy, right, that couldn't grasp the concept, that was then brought by so many philosophers afterwards, right? So this is the summary of kind of what we wanted to talk about today, and I really want for all of us, right, to take a moment now that we're going through this to this pandemic. And it's obviously things are not easy for a lot of people. So many of us, right, are being in contact and going through a lot of health issues related or unrelated to the pandemic. We have secondary effects of the pandemic that we're seeing now, right, and the depression and job and economy and all those things. And we have the primary effects of the pandemic, which are related to the health and of the individuals, right? And all those things are happening around us. And this is a very important moment for us to think about God, right? And instead of projecting our fears and our questions outside and say, well, this is all God's fault, this is some sort of punishment from God, it's the perfect time for us to look inside ourselves and think, well, how can I take this, right, which is not happening by chance, right? Because God is perfect, God is immutable, the laws are perfect, right? And make this an opportunity for me to rethink my own faith, my own concepts, right? My relationships, my moral development, right? Or can I actually do something to help the ones that are around us, right? Through actions, through prayers, to so many different ways. But it is a moment where we should reconcile in every single place all this concepts of religion and God that we have inside of us, whether or not we're spiritists studying spiritism every day, or Catholics reading the Bible every day, or Muslims that are studying the Quran every day and praying multiple times a day. It doesn't matter which religious background we are right now. This is a time that we unite, because the only way we're going to defeat all of this down the road, and I'm not talking about only the vaccines and things now, I'm talking about down the road, like 100 years from now, we're going to look back at our society today and say, what did we learn as a society, right, from that moment in time? And I think this is the greatest opportunity. And why not we start about really thinking about who we are in relation to our Creator and what is God, right? And how do I see God with the rational concept of that? And establishing that rationalized concept of God, can I improve my connection to God instead of shutting it down, right? And I think this is really, really a time that we have to do that very, very much. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. Excellent, excellent lecture. Thank you very much. It's a great way to start the year. And why not start from the beginning, right? From the very top. I think we mentioned early that we're using a different format starting today, just to try out to see if people like it. This kind of a round table. So we have 4 panelists waiting in the back room. I will bring them on now. And we have one question from our listeners, and I do encourage others who are on watching us live to send your comments. We have people from Brazil, people from Canada listening to us this morning. Let me bring in everyone. Sandra, hi, Rafael, Marcio, and then Teresa. Brought you guys in alphabetical order. How's everybody doing?
Oh, good.
Very good. Everybody is microphone on. Everybody is looking beautiful. So, Marco, I will start. Excellent points that you made. I like the point that we need to understand that God is not of this universe. God is beyond this universe. And by definition, then, we can't use our scientific tools to touch or prove the existence of God. We have to use indirect methods for that, correct?
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting concept, and that's exactly what you said. I mean, we can't. So we can only measure things. We kind of think about this all the time, right? So when we're teaching students, the same idea, right? We say that, how do we assess something if your rulers are very limited, right? So how can you measure a concept if you have the tools to do it? How can you describe something if you don't have anything that can possibly and even the technical term or word or machine or equipment that you can actually say this is what it is. So if you think about all the concept and thinking about God not in being the material and not part necessarily of what we see and not what we understand, then yes, then it is beyond, right, our comprehension, and is beyond this universe. And we can't set up a tool or experiment to say, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to look at this, because everything we measure is basically creation, right? So we have to go by concepts, right? We have to go by, I think the theoretical models that we can build are much more powerful than experimental models in this particular context. So
Okay. Who's going to go first on the panelists?
I can put my 50 cents. So I was thinking. So first, thank you, Marco, for the lecture. It's not an easy topic to talk about God. What can we say about it? It's very hard.
Yeah.
So I like the concepts that you brought from different philosophers. And I think as you were speaking, I was taking some notes just so that I could remember. And in the beginning, you said that we start understanding that God is not like a statue or a person. It's an abstract concept that we can't really grasp. And I really think that this is a huge advancement for us, because it allows us to open our minds instead of closing and imagine that it's first a man, an old guy that is sitting there somewhere. We look up and we think that's the sky, the atmosphere of this small rock that is going around a small star in one galaxy. It's where God is. So the fact that we are capable today of seeing this as an abstract concept that we can't really grasp, I believe it opens us to really feel God. Like we can't really understand it, but we feel God's presence. It's much more a feeling that like a proof or an understanding. And well, I don't want to take all the time, so I'll reserve my other comments for later.
Sandra, you seem to be ready to jump in.
Yeah. It's exactly. I was starting to smile because that's exactly what I was going to say, Rafael. We can't. The concept of God is a feeling of God in us, in all senses. Not only spiritually, because here we're in a spiritual group, but emotionally, physically. In all senses, mentally. They are all around us. They are in us and around us. He put us the seed in us for us to feel him, for us to be able to embrace his powerness, embrace his greatness. And we all have that in us. And sometimes we forget and we try to give this power to somebody else instead of evolving this power that we have in us. And it's all the good things, the power of love, the power of gratitude, the power of all the goodness that his son, when Jesus came, he brought to us. So if we could just, and usually we do ask for God's presence when we are going through some hard times in our lives. But even on the good times, we can remember to feel him too, because he's in us in all senses. That's my 2 cents.
Go ahead, Marcio.
Yeah, and I connect with what they are saying. I feel like this feeling a lot of times come with our desire to hear from God, to communicate with God, right? And we keep waiting for big things, like what happened with Paul of Tarsus when he met Jesus, right? He became blind, this great light, and then Jesus come and talk to him. We're always waiting for God or Jesus or someone to come in a spectacular way what God is communicating to us through small things, through a bird and song, something that is small, and we just need to be open, to what we are asking for and what the messages are coming.
Very good.
That's right.
Teresa.
Yeah, I think pretty much it has been exposed everything by the panel about the concepts of God and how that's how we feel his presence, right? By what's around us. We don't need to really understand who God is, but we need just to feel it and be sure that he is around us. The only thing I want to add is actually Fab just released a book like very recently. I start to read. I'm just in the beginning. I'm on 16 chapters. It's a very long book. I'm I think on chapter 5, but it's called God Before Jesus and After Jesus. That's the title of the book. And actually that's what he talks about, like the whole concept, and it's very interesting because in the beginning it talks about the concept of God, like from the primitive worlds, like caveman, how it comes from that time already, that we have the instinct, like Mark was bringing in the beginning, that we some way we have the instinct to say, if I cannot see it, if I cannot touch it, then it has to be explained by something that it's above all of this, right? And that comes right back in there, like long time ago. And it's a very interesting book. Unfortunately, it's not translated to English, but it's called God Before and After Jesus. And even talks about that there's two theories actually, that the beginning, like in the very beginning, people were monotheists. They believed in one God, and then this was degenerated to polytheism, and then finally, like thousands and thousands of years ago, then the Jewish people brought back the monotheism, right? And some people think no, it was polytheist right from the beginning. So it's very interesting to see how the concepts of God has evolved since the beginning, since we were created simply ignorant. We already have those concepts in us. They start to get stronger, of course, as we get more conscious of who we are, and because when we're very primitive, like we pretty much just living by instinct. But as we start to create more and more this conscious that we are someone, that there's someone out there, the concepts of God also start to get stronger and stronger inside of us, and this necessity to understand what's beyond what we can comprehend becomes strong in us as well, right? So I really recommend the book. I'm like I said, I'm in the beginning, but it's a very interesting book. And that's what it talks about, actually, the concept of God.
And I just want to add to that, Teresa. I think that I just want to add quickly that I think that you're right. There's several theories, right, about like how the concept of God evolved, and I think the fact that we reflected our own egoistic view on God and presented it in a humanized way is actually detracted us from actually delayed us, let's put it this way, delayed us from really trying to understand what God is, because that actually pushed science in a tangential way, because obviously scientists would not see that in a very easy way, right? Because that's very not possible, right? So scientists would be pushed away from it and took away from the original concept of God, which was basically, for example, like so many scientists have evolved that, the fact that we have a rule that coordinates the entire government and the universe, basically it's scientifically way of saying that it has to have had one point of creation, right? But again, all those concepts basically have delayed us from reaching that conclusion. I think that's going to happen. And I think with Hawking's idea too, he's kind of on that line. He said, potentially science will one day actually create some sort of theoretical way of actually explaining this one creation, right? One creator.
Yeah, you're right. It was all about egoism, because when certain rulers started to make themselves God on earth, it automatically meant that there were at least two gods, the one on earth and the one outside earth. Yeah. And if we are in business, that we know that anytime you have two people who don't agree on anything, you create a committee. So they created a committee of gods. by the time we're in the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians. I do have a question from one of our listeners today. It's from Anna. It's not directly about God, but indirectly everything is about God. And she's asking, back to your point, Mark, about us living through this pandemic. From a Spiritist point of view, what's the degree of consequences for those people who object to getting vaccinated, right? Whether, regardless of some of their reasons, and there are people who might have reasons, but all of them in some ways are challenging science and making a decision for themselves, which we have the right, we have the free will to do it.
Yeah.
But from our ethical and moral and spiritist view, what do we expect some of the consequences of those decisions?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think it's impossible for us to tell exactly what will be a consequence of something, right? Because there's so many attenuating factors and factors that make it more challenging, right? So there's, the exact consequence, I think, we're going to hear at some point from both the spiritual world and the material world. But in general terms, let's put it in general terms, along many years ago, we could have argued that not knowing thing would be a way of saying, like, I don't know this, we don't know what's going to happen, so that's an attenuating factor for your decision, right? But nowadays it's a little bit difficult to use that argument, because there is actually a plethora of evidence, right, supporting the use of vaccinations, for example. There is overwhelming evidence that in any way you look at it, right, vaccinations will be safer than having the disease. Like there's really no way of you using any sort of logical evidence against that concept, right? So the idea of saying that we have questions and I don't know, and that becomes a little bit difficult now as an attenuating factor for your decision, right? And I think that is something that people are going to have a consequence, because obviously everything that we're doing right now will have a consequence, right? And science is also God's creation. So some people think that science is some sort of an outlier of the universe, and it's not. Like, we're doing this vaccine because there's like 30-40 years of research on this area that finally now people dedicated their lives to get this going, and it's done fast because of many reasons, right? Because we have funds, we have knowledge, we have labs available to do it. There's so many reasons why. And then it comes together, and then it's available, and then we say no. So that is obviously going to have a lot of consequences. We can't tell exactly what. It's impossible for us to judge and to evaluate scenarios and to say kind of this is what's going to happen. But in general terms, there's no way to go against an argument that this is saving lives, right? And that's the concept. If you're doing something that is saving lives, I think it's challenging for you to think all the way around.
Anyone has anything to add?
Yeah, I think that's what Mark was saying. It's hard to say what's going to be there's no one consequence, because each case is a case. It's going to be a lot of, and we don't know what it's really leading each person to do that. I know some people are not taking because they've been, and they're still responsible, but they've been led by even religious leaders who are telling them not to do it. So inside their faith, they really think that they are pleasing God. So the intention there is not bad. They're just being misled, and of course they're allowing it to people to lead them. Anyways, it's still a choice. But you see how it is. Like in their mind, they think they're pleasing God. So it's different than the person who says, I don't care, I'm not gonna take it, it's my right. So that very selfish way, when I think about me first and then my community after. So the reasons that lead people not to take it, it's so big, from being extremely selfish to really think that's the right thing that I'm doing. So that's why it's very hard to say, oh, this is what's going to happen. But we know it is going to have a consequence, especially if my choice led now to the death of someone else, let's say, for example, right? Because now I'm passing to someone, because it's not just about taking vaccines or not. Is when I don't wear my mask when I should wear, because I should have the right to not wear my mask. Is when I'm gathering with people when I should not be gathering people and I'm helping to spread. So it's way more, it goes way more beyond than using the vaccine or not, right? We're all going to be responsible for our actions. And if those actions now lead to the bad to someone, it is going to have some consequence, but it's hard to know which one, right? It's not black and white, because everything is going to be taken in consideration.
Thank you very much. So we're coming to the end. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you. Very special thank you to Marco for his wonderful lecture today. Havael, you'll be here next week with your lecture. We're all looking forward to it. For everyone who's been listening today, please give us your feedback on this format, even for people who might see this lecture later on. This week, we had it live on Facebook. We had it live on YouTube. Next week, we'll add Instagram to the list, hoping to get more people involved. So please join us. Come with your questions. All questions, respectful questions are valid. And we will hopefully see you again next week. So I would like to close this with a prayer, and I will ask my lovely wife, Sandra, to today give us the final prayer.
Okay, so let's close our eyes. And in this beautiful vibration of peace, love, and harmony that involve us, every time that we talk about God, He comes very close to us. And it's His presence that makes this exercise and this learning process of living every day easier, that full our hearts and our minds and our physical body with His presence. We ask God to bless our planet, to bless us and those who are listening to us, to bless all these beautiful people around the world, and give us the patience that we need to go through this pandemic. So be it.
So be it.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. We'll
Thank
see
you.
you all next
Thank
week.
you.
Have a wonderful week.
Thank you,
Bye.
guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So,
Joe, is it still live?
no, we ended the broadcast. We're in the back room.
It's showing live here. It's still counting the numbers.
Oh, just because. Okay, yes, end broadcast.